guys, Live for Love TV. I want you to like, share and subscribe. Big up yourself.
Welcome back to Live for Love TV. Today is the 23rd day of the second month inside the 22nd year of the 21st century. Hope everyone's doing well out there. Well, we are at that stage again. For many people who maybe thought it was behind them, we're at that stage again where war is in Europe, and we have to call it Europe. Now, there's war all the time. As we know, wars have been going on for the last 10, 15, 20 years, constantly, right back to the time in ancient history. But Europe, wars are a little bit different. European wars, and when people in Europe have wars, they draw the whole world into it. It's not like when two African countries fight, or two tribes, or maybe two people in other in parts of the world. When Europeans go to war, they very rarely war by themselves. They very quickly bring more people into it. And this is why we've had 2 world wars already. Though the whole world wasn't fighting in every part of the world, it was a fight for every part of the world. When you think about it, every inch was ruled or controlled by somebody. Either Britain, France, Australia, Japan, China. All these places were ruled over, all the other places other than their own countries were ruled over by these countries. So when it called it a world war, it was a fight for the world itself and for its resources. So it was a world war, though people say there was no war in certain countries. Yeah, that's true, but that's a small fact, and if you don't understand history. Now, Russia have apparently invaded the Ukraine, which is obviously on the border or very close to Russia. Now, a lot of people are angry about this, but let's look at this from a sober perspective and history. We recognize that these big powers, major powers such as Russia, cannot afford to have enemies on their border. Now, I don't know why anybody would be surprised by that. China is in the same situation, and America has been in the same situation for over 70 years. They've never allowed anybody that they don't like, or their governments they don't like, to be on their borders or anywhere close to them, even though they're surrounded by sea. Anybody close to them, they don't want anybody that they don't agree with. They invaded a small country such as Grenada. Now, how could that be justified? The country is so small, I don't know how they even found it on a map, yet they were able, a mite of America was able to invade Grenada. Why did they do that? Was that right? People who are caught up in the propaganda of the West are going to say that this man is doing something that they don't do, but they do this all day long. This is something that Europeans have done all day long. You can't have enemies on your border. You can't have enemies close to you. People have always got to be like-minded or think like you, or they become a danger, and eventually they'll be invaded. Yeah, I was having a conversation with a journalist friend of mine, who I'm gonna get into this war situation with him at some point, because his views are so a million miles away from me. All I was asking him was, he's saying it's not justified for Russia to go into Ukraine. Fair enough, good point. Fair point, I should say. But what about the fact that England and the USA went into Iraq after the United Nations said they shouldn't? The second time, that is, I'm talking about. They went into Iraq. They had a vote, and everybody voted not to go in. But these two decided to defy the whole world, and they went in. They overthrew the government, caused all kind of mayhem, basically killed the leader, even though they'll claim it was his own people that did it. It was them. They were behind it. And somehow, not only did they get away with it, but very few people are calling it out as if it's one of the disastrous things that happened in the world. Now, when you have a power like Russia, and they do something that looks similar, they decided that they're not going to allow the Ukraine to be part of NATO, or to stay part of NATO and be allowing the NATO. Remember what NATO is, North Atlantic Treaty that was done after the Second World War. The North Atlantic Treaty was anti-Russia. That was all it was. It was there as a America/Europe agreement to join hands to fight the Russian enemy and a Russian terror. So if someone who is now on the border of Russia decides to join that organization, I mean, how the hell would Russia sit there and say, oh, no problem, you can join them, no problem, even though they're against us, they're all our enemies, and they're sworn to bring us down and to bring our way of life down. You can join them. It's quite obvious that was going to cause a problem, but people who are caught up in the propaganda of the West can't see these things. They don't even understand them. They don't understand what they're looking at. You know, as my journalist friends will say, and I don't want to misrepresent him, but he says he wants to see the world has to stay as it is now. But that in itself is ridiculous. If the world is as it is now because of something that was done wrong before, to say it has to stay as it is now, not only is that ridiculous, that encourages someone to try and do exactly what the people did before. Because they're not doing things because it's right and wrong, it's doing because of weak and strong. If you have the might, you take over a country, and there's nobody strong enough to take you to The Hague or to any of these places where you can be tried, then you're always gonna cause mayhem in the world. And Russia sat back, and no matter what people are saying right now about Mr. Putin, no friend of mine, I don't know anything about him. I'm like you, I see him through Western eyes most of the time. I don't know anything about him. I certainly don't speak Russian. But one thing I do know is I haven't seen, and he's been around for decade after decade after decade, I haven't seen much aggression from him as compared to some of these Western powers who are now saying he's bloodthirsty. It's quite a strange one. That it reminds me of the old days in America 300-400 years ago. All the Indians were bloodthirsty, complete bloodthirsty savages that would kill your wife and your children. Nothing was said about what they were doing to people in the place that they were born and were there for thousands of years. They didn't do any wrong. They just walked around with their head in the air, whistling Dixie, and people just came and attacked them. And if you believe that, you believe anything. And this is the problem with a lot of people. They really have no consciousness of history whatsoever. Their only interest is what they can get out of the world right now. And when they start to struggle to get things out of the world, all of a sudden they go saying, oh, whatever the propaganda machine is out there is saying, they just paraphrase it. We've gone through a pandemic recently, which I've seen more communist type behavior during this pandemic than I've ever seen, probably even in some of these other countries. Amazing. If you don't do this, you're our enemy. If you don't do this, you're in trouble. If you don't do this, you get no job. If you don't do this, you can't come here. If you don't do what we say, you can't come into this building. I mean, ridiculous. If that's not a communist behavior that we've been taught, then I don't know what is. So we have to be very careful when we start joining sides. I'm not taking sides in this war. I don't have to. It's not something that it interests me in as much as I need to take a side. But surely if somebody comes over the hill and they're against me, I've taken a side by the fact that they've come over my hill and they're after me. That's the side I take, and that's the side anybody would take. And that's why I said Russia with the Ukraine, wrapping up with NATO. The Russians are left with no. What else can they do? Just go and look at what NATO is. Look at its manifesto. Look at why it was set up. Look at what it is and what it stands for. If you understand what it stands for, you wouldn't be asking the silly question of why does Russia feel so aggrieved about the Ukraine? You wouldn't ask that such a question. But anyway, get back to you soon. Leave some comments if you want some more upgrade on the history of these parts of the world in Eastern Europe. I will do so. If you want to put comments, I'll reply to them. You don't have to agree with me. I'm not agreeing with the aggression from one side or another. But you're not going to have me singing your propaganda machine stuff that these guys are wrong, but we're not wrong. So take care. Live for Love TV.
I want you to... Guys, this is Nikki. I want you to...
I'm going to start it.
No, audition.
Oh, okay. All right.
People, one step more, one step more, one step more, one step more until you reach your goals. One step more. This is Live for Love TV.